The gate is already opening. Gravel pops under the tires. The guard's hand rises, slow, almost lazy, and for one suspended second, the whole world narrows to that gloved fist. Is it a salute, or is it a stop? The man in the passenger seat doesn't breathe. Can't. His SS uniform, stolen 2 sizes too large, shifts against collarbones that jut like broken fence posts. 2 years of starvation will do that to a man. 2 years of hauling concrete in the shadow of a crematorium, watching the smoke rise, counting the days until the smoke is yours. He keeps his eyes forward, jaw set. The silver insignia on his collar catches the June sun like a dare. The guard's fist completes its arc. A salute? The convertible rolls through. June 20th, 1942. The most dangerous place on earth. And 4 men with no papers, no authorization, and no plan B just walked out the front door. Now, here's what you need to understand. That car was stolen. Those uniforms were stolen. Those weapons were stolen. Every single prop in that audacious little performance was lifted, borrowed, or bluffed into existence by men who had nothing. Nothing except 5 words. Whispered 3 weeks earlier between 2 prisoners hauling rubble in the mud. Words so quiet they barely disturbed the air. Words that somehow became a stolen car, 4 forged identities, and the most breathtaking con in the history of the Second World War. You want to know how a starving man in a borrowed uniform stares down the most feared military force in history and wins? Then we need to go back, not to the plan. There was no plan. Back to the whisper. If you've ever wondered what pure human audacity looks like under impossible pressure, hit subscribe and stay with me, because I promise you this story gets more insane with every single minute. And drop a comment right now. Do you think you could keep a straight face in a stolen SS uniform 3 meters from a checkpoint with a guard's hand on his pistol? Tell me below. Let's go. Let me paint you a picture of what escape actually meant at Auschwitz. The perimeter fence carried 6,000 volts. Touch it and you're gone before you hit the ground. Beyond the fence, watchtowers mounted MG-34 machine guns, positioned specifically so their fields of fire overlapped. No blind spots, no gaps. Searchlights swept the grounds all night, every night, without pause. And that's just the physical barrier. In the 18 months the camp had been operating, prisoners had attempted escape dozens of times. You know how many actually made it out? You could count them on one hand. The rest? They found them on the wire, or they didn't find them at all. But here's the part that made escape almost morally impossible. The SS had a policy. For every prisoner who successfully escaped, 10 random inmates, people who had nothing to do with it, people who didn't even know the escapee's name, were selected and executed. 10 innocent people dead because one person ran. So escape wasn't just a personal gamble. It was a death sentence you handed to strangers. That policy did something to people psychologically. It made hope feel like a selfish act. Survival meant keeping your head down, your eyes forward, and your thoughts buried so deep the guards couldn't smell them on you. Piechowski understood this better than most. He had watched a Polish priest named Maximilian Kolbe, a fellow prisoner, voluntarily step forward and offer his own life in place of a stranger condemned to starvation. He watched Kolbe walk into that death cell without flinching. That's the moral universe these 4 men were living in, where the bravest thing a person could do was simply refuse to disappear quietly. And one of them was about to refuse very loudly indeed. So who were these 4 men? Because that's the thing about this story that gets me every time. They weren't soldiers, they weren't spies, they weren't action heroes with a special set of skills and a backup plan. They were ordinary. And that's exactly what makes this so extraordinary. Kazimierz Piechowski, born October 3, 1919, in a small Polish village, a Boy Scout, an engineer in training, the kind of young man who believed in systems, in order, in doing things the right way. Then the Nazis invaded Poland, and the right way stopped existing. He was captured in his hometown of Tuchu, not for anything violent, not for carrying a weapon, for being a Boy Scout. The Nazis had labeled the Polish scouting movement a criminal organization. That was enough. What followed was a chain of prisons that reads like a slow, tightening noose. Baligrod, Sanok, Montelupich in Krakow, Wishnich. Each transfer moving him closer to the place no one came back from. On June 20th, 1940, Piechowski arrived at Auschwitz, prisoner number 918. He was 20 years old. His first assignment? On the Leichen Commando, the corpse detail. For 6 weeks, his job was hauling bodies to the crematorium, including those shot at the Black Wall by SS executioners. Every single day. Think about what that does to a 20-year-old, what it does to your relationship with death, with risk, with the future. At some point, when you've carried enough bodies, the calculus changes. You stop fearing death the way normal people do, because you've already been living inside it. Piechowski had 2 secrets he kept buried from the guards. First, he was fluent in German. He never let on. Second, his work rotation gave him access to the camp's execution list. He knew who was scheduled to die before they did. Those 2 secrets would save 4 lives. Eugeniusz Bandera, born 1906 in Chortkov, a mechanic with grease permanently under his fingernails and a wife and young son waiting somewhere on the other side of the wire. His assignment at Auschwitz was the motor pool. Every day, Bandera worked within arm's reach of the camp's vehicles, including the commandant's prized Steyr 220. He knew every engine, every key, every schedule. Then one day, Piechowski saw Bandera's name on the execution list. Here's what I find remarkable about what happened next. Most men, hearing they're scheduled to die within the week, collapse inward. They grieve, they pray, they accept. Bandera looked at the commandant's car and started thinking. He didn't ask, how do we sneak out? He asked, how do we make them let us out? That single shift in thinking, from hiding to performing, is what made this escape possible. Bandera didn't just come up with a plan, he reframed the entire problem. Stanisław Gustav Jaster, the youngest of the 4. Born January 1st, 1921, just 21 years old, a resistance fighter and underground military operative who had been imprisoned for fighting the Nazi occupation. But Jaster was carrying something that made him the most important person in that car. Hidden in his barracks, wrapped in oilcloth, was a 40-page report compiled by a man named Witold Pilecki, a Polish resistance officer who had deliberately allowed himself to be captured and sent to Auschwitz specifically to document what was happening inside. Gas chambers, crematoriums, systematic medical experiments on living human beings. It was the first comprehensive eyewitness account of Auschwitz's extermination program ever written. And Allied governments, the people with the power to act, were choosing to look the other way. Jaster wasn't just escaping for himself, he was carrying evidence that the world needed to see. He survived the escape. He delivered the report. He fought with the resistance and distinguished himself with extraordinary acts of bravery. And then, in the summer of 1943, he vanished. What happened to Jaster after that is one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the entire war. We'll come back to it, because trust me, it doesn't end the way you'd expect. Josef Lempart, born August 19, 1916, a Catholic priest from Wadowice, a gentle by nature, quiet by habit. For months at Auschwitz, Lempart had done the most heartbreaking job imaginable, administering last rites to dying prisoners, whispering prayers over men and women the world had already forgotten. Watching the machinery of death operate at full capacity day after day with no end in sight. When Piechowski came to him with the plan, Lempart didn't ask questions. He didn't negotiate. He crossed himself once and said yes. On the morning of the escape, in the dusty attic of an empty barracks, it was Lempart who gathered the 4 men together and led them in a whispered prayer. Not for their own survival, for the families they might never see again. That detail has stayed with me since the first time I read it. Of 4 men about to attempt the impossible, and the priest among them prays for everyone else first. 4 men, 4 completely different lives, 4 different reasons to risk everything, and exactly 11 days to turn a whispered idea into the most audacious escape in the history of the Third Reich. Here's what I love about this plan. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't desperate improvisation. It was surgical. These 4 men, starving, exhausted, living under constant surveillance, sat down and reverse-engineered the entire security apparatus of Auschwitz. They found every crack, every predictable pattern, every moment where the machine relaxed, even slightly, and they built their escape inside those cracks. The date. Why Saturday, June 20th, 1942? Because Bandera had spent months watching the motor pool schedule. Every Saturday at noon, the work details ended. Guards rotated. The motor pool emptied out during the lunch hour. For approximately 15 minutes, maybe less, the camp's internal rhythm stuttered. 15 minutes, that's all they needed. But here's the detail that gave Piechowski chills when he thought about it later. June 20th, 1942 wasn't just a tactically convenient date. It was exactly 2 years, to the day, since Piechowski had arrived at Auschwitz as prisoner number 918. He would later describe that symmetry as almost supernatural. The day the camp took everything from him would become the day he took himself back. The key. Bandera had one shot at this, and he knew it. During a routine maintenance shift, he pressed the motor pool master key firmly into a bar of soap, deep enough to capture every ridge and groove of the cut. That night, working by feel in near total darkness, he filed a duplicate from a piece of scrap metal he'd been quietly collecting for days. He tested it twice. Both times it turned. 1 bar of soap, 1 piece of scrap metal, 1 key that would start the commandant's car. The bolt. Weeks before the escape, Piechowski had identified the route into the SS equipment warehouse through a coal chute trapdoor in a building adjacent to the motor pool. The door was bolted from the inside, so he loosened it. Just enough. Not enough to be noticed on a casual inspection, but enough that a firm shoulder would pop it open in seconds. 1 bolt, quietly turned a fraction of a rotation. He filed away in his memory and never touched again. The Death Pact. This is the part that stops me cold every time. The 4 men gathered in the darkness of their barracks and made a solemn agreement. If capture became certain, if the plan collapsed and the SS closed in, each man would take his own life before allowing himself to be taken. Not out of despair, out of calculation. They all knew what happened in the interrogation rooms of Block 11. The SS had methods that could break anyone. Broken men gave up names. And the names these 4 men carried, resistance contacts, underground operatives, people still fighting, were worth more than their own lives. They shook hands on it. 4 men agreeing to die rather than talk. The gap. But here's the thing that kept Piechowski awake at night during those 11 days. Every vehicle leaving Auschwitz required documented authorization. Stamped paperwork, signed by camp administration, verified at the gate. They had none, not a single forged document, not 1 signature. The entire plan, the key, the bolt, the uniforms, the car. All of it came down to one man's ability to perform absolute authority so convincingly that no guard would dare ask for paperwork. No backup, no contingency, just nerve. And here's the thing that's almost darkly funny in hindsight. A single electronic vehicle authorization system, the kind that exists in every modern correctional facility today, would have ended this entire plan before the engine turned over. The gap wasn't in the guards. It wasn't in the fence or the towers or the weapons. or it was in a piece of paper that nobody thought to fake, because nobody thought anyone would be bold enough not to have it. The plan was as close to perfect as 4 starving men with nothing could possibly make it. But plans don't survive contact with reality. And on the morning of June 20th, reality was waiting for them at every single checkpoint. 11:30 in the morning, June 20th, 1942. 4 men climb into the attic of an empty barracks. Sawdust and mildew in the air, thin strips of light cutting through the wooden slats. Outside, the camp moves through its Saturday routine. Guards rotating, work details winding down, the motor pool going quiet for lunch. Lempart kneels, the others follow. He doesn't pray for their survival. He prays for the families waiting somewhere beyond the wire, on the ones who don't know what's about to happen. Then they stand up, look at each other, and go. The garbage cart. They emerge pushing a roll-wagon commando cart, the kind used for hauling kitchen waste, potato peels, coal dust, flies swarming in thick black clouds around the whole thing. 4 prisoners, a reeking cart, a completely unremarkable Saturday sight. The inner gate guard glances up. His hand moves toward his clipboard. 3 seconds. That's how close it comes to ending right there, before the warehouse, before the uniforms, before any of it. 3 seconds of a bored guard deciding whether this is worth his attention. He waves them through. Here's the thing about oppression that Piechowski understood completely. Guards who spend months looking through people rather than at them eventually stop seeing them altogether. Their invisibility, the very thing the SS had spent 2 years enforcing, was now their greatest weapon. The warehouse. The trapdoor gives way with one push, that loosened bolt doing exactly what Piechowski had planned weeks earlier. Cool darkness. A wooden ladder descending into the cellar. The interior door is locked. Jaster hits it with his shoulder. Once, twice, third time, the old wood splinters and gives. And then they see it. Rows of SS uniforms hanging in perfect order, Luger pistols in leather holsters, Mauser rifles, ammunition crates stacked against the wall. They strip off their prisoner stripes, the gray rags that had defined their entire existence for 2 years, and pull on the wool uniforms of the men who had been trying to kill them. Piechowski catches his reflection in a cracked mirror on the wall. But he doesn't recognize himself, and that's exactly the point. The uniforms hang loose. Bones sharpened by 2 years of starvation don't fill out SS wool the way they should. Any guard who looked closely, really closely, would see the truth in about 4 seconds. The entire plan depended on no one looking closely. The commandant's car. Bandera slides the scrap metal key into the ignition of the Steyr 220, the personal vehicle of SS Hauptsturmführer Paul Kreutzmann, the most recognizable car in the entire camp. It starts first try. They load in. Piechowski takes the commanding officer's position. Jaster presses himself against the seat, Pilecki's 40-page report hidden against his chest, the document that could change the course of the war if they make it out. The gauntlet. First checkpoint. An SS private looks up. I seize the uniform, seize the car. He salutes. Piechowski returns it, keeps his face stone cold, keeps the car moving. I want you to sit with that for a second. The man who has spent 2 years being degraded, starved, and worked toward death, being saluted by the system that did it to him. The psychological whiplash of that single moment is almost impossible to describe. Second checkpoint. Another salute. Another wave through. Third. Same. And then the final gate. The barrier is down. A sergeant steps out, hand resting on his holster. He walks toward the car slowly. No urgency, just procedure. The engine idles. Nobody breathes. Lempert's voice, barely a whisper from the back seat. Do something. Now. And something in Piechowski snaps open. 2 years of humiliation, of hauling corpses, of watching people die, of keeping his German fluency buried, of pretending to be less than human. all of it channeling into one single explosion of manufactured fury. He leans out the window and unleashes. Who is this guard to delay a senior officer? Does he have any idea whose vehicle this is? Does he want to explain to the commandant personally why his Saturday afternoon was interrupted by an incompetent sergeant at a routine checkpoint? The sergeant's face cycles through confusion, then alarm, then the particular terror of a man who has just realized he may have made a catastrophic mistake. The barrier rises. The Steyr 220 rockets forward. Piechowski doesn't look back, but in the side mirror, just for a heartbeat, he catches the sergeant's expression as the car disappears down the road. The man knows. He already knows. On they just drove out the front gate of Auschwitz. Let that sink in for a second. 4 men who were supposed to be dead in stolen uniforms in a stolen car with no papers just bluffed their way past the most feared military force in history. I want to know, what would you have done in that sergeant's position? Would you have opened the gate? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story is hitting different for you right now, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Keep watching, because what happens next is where this story gets truly dark. The Steyr 220 disappeared down the road, and back inside Auschwitz, all hell broke loose. Commandant Rudolf Höss didn't just lose 4 prisoners that Saturday afternoon. He lost his own car, his own uniforms, his own weapons, used against him, and by men he considered subhuman in front of his entire garrison. The humiliation was total. Berlin dispatched an independent investigative commission, not to punish the escapees, but to answer one question that was keeping senior SS officers awake at night. How was this even possible? The first man to pay was Kurt Pachala, the motor pool supervisor, implicated by nothing more than circumstantial proximity. He maintained the vehicles, therefore he must have known. There was no trial, no evidence presented, just Block 11, the standing cell. A space so small a man cannot sit or lie down. Pachala was tortured for weeks. By the end, he was eating the leather of his own shoes. He died of thirst and starvation on January 14, 1943. He may have been entirely innocent. Then came the families. Piechowski's parents, arrested and murdered inside Auschwitz. Jaster's father, dead at Auschwitz, December 3, 1942. His mother, deported to Majdanek, later transferred back to Auschwitz, where she perished on July 26, 1943. Lempart's mother, deported to Auschwitz. She did not survive. The escape saved 4 lives. The reprisals destroyed at least 7. The math of resistance under totalitarianism is never clean. And then there's Jaster. Remember the teaser from earlier? The youngest of the 4, the one carrying Pilecki's report against his chest as they roared through the gate? He delivered the report. He rejoined the resistance. He fought with extraordinary courage. And then, sometime in 1943, he was arrested by the Gestapo again. What happened next is where the story fractures into darkness. There are allegations, disputed, never proven, of collaboration. A 1968 account that was later discredited. Whispers that he may have been executed not by the Nazis, but by his own resistance comrades. No documents, no grave, no resolution. A man who survived Auschwitz may have been killed by the people he was fighting for. And one final consequence that touched every prisoner who came after them. Because 4 men proved that a uniform change could make a prisoner disappear, Auschwitz allegedly introduced a new policy in direct response. Permanent identification numbers tattooed directly onto skin. Not a badge that could be swapped, not a uniform that could be stripped. A number burned into the body itself. The mark of Auschwitz. Carried for life. So because of 4 men who refused to disappear quietly. So did any of it matter? Jaster delivered Pilecki's 40-page report to the Home Army High Command in Warsaw. It was forwarded to London, one of the first detailed eyewitness accounts of Auschwitz's extermination program to ever reach Allied desks. Gas chambers, crematoriums, systematic murder on an industrial scale. All documented, all verified. Allied governments read it and largely chose inaction. That bitter truth sits alongside everything else this story carries. But here's what cannot be undone. The document existed. It was preserved. And after the war, it became part of the historical record that made denial impossible. The escape didn't stop the Holocaust, but it helped ensure the Holocaust could never be erased. Piechowski survived the war, and then spent 7 years in a communist prison, sentenced as an enemy of the state simply for having been a Home Army member. He built an engineering career, traveled to 60 countries with his wife, spent decades walking into schools and sitting down with young people to tell them exactly what happened inside that camp. In 2006, his story became the documentary Uciekinier, Man on the Run. In 2009, musician Katie Carr wrote Commander's Car in his honor. On December 15, 2017, Kazimierz Piechowski died peacefully, aged 98. The boy who arrived at Auschwitz at 20, who drove out the front gate at 22, who survived a death camp, a communist prison, and nearly a century of living, and never once stopped telling the truth about what he saw. And the escape is over, the legacy is settled. But the question that started this whole story, how do you stop something like this from ever happening again? That's where we're going next. Here's the thing about this escape that most people miss. It wasn't genius that got them out. It was gaps. 5 specific, entirely preventable gaps that exist in any security system run by humans who've gotten too comfortable. Failure 1. The paperwork gap. Every vehicle leaving Auschwitz required documented authorization. Nobody checked. One digital verification system, standard in every modern correctional facility today, ends this escape before the engine turns over. Biometric authorization, RFID vehicle tracking, multi-database clearance. None of it existed, all of it exists now. Failure 2, the uniform vault. A weapons and uniforms stored behind a single wooden door. No inventory log, no surveillance, no access record. Modern facilities run real-time equipment audits with multi-layer access controls. You can't remove a uniform today without 3 systems knowing about it. Failure 3, the work detail blind spot. The gate guard saw 4 prisoners with a cart and waved them through without checking a single roster. Today, digital work detail systems cross-reference prisoner locations in real time. That cart doesn't move without a verified head count. Failure 4, the authority exploit. Piechowski's fury worked because guards were trained to obey rank, not verify it. That psychological vulnerability doesn't just live in prisons. It lives in corporate security, cybersecurity, social engineering attacks. And the lesson hasn't changed in 80 years. Authority should always be verified, never assumed. Failure 5, the complacency window. They chose Saturday noon deliberately, the most predictable low point in the entire weekly schedule. Predictable patterns create exploitable windows. Every security professional knows this. Randomized rotations, unpredictable inspections, AI-assisted anomaly detection. The moment a schedule becomes routine, it becomes a blueprint. 5 failures, 4 men, 1 escape that changed history, and 1 final thought before we close this out. Let's go back to that gate. The Steyr 220 idling in the gravel. The sergeant's hand drifting toward his holster. 4 men in stolen uniforms over starved bones, holding their breath inside the most dangerous 10 seconds of their lives. That image has stayed with me since the first time I read this story. Because it captures something true about human beings that no history book quite manages to say out loud. They didn't escape because they were extraordinary. They escaped because they refused to accept that the situation was impossible, and in doing so, they exposed something the Nazis desperately needed the world not to know: that the machinery of death had cracks in it, that the system built to make people disappear quietly could be beaten by 4 ordinary men with a bar of soap, a loose bolt, and the audacity to look their oppressors in the eye. That's what Kazimierz Piechowski proved on June 20th, 1942. Not that he was special, that they were not invincible. If this story hit different for you, if you found yourself holding your breath at that final checkpoint, I want to hear from you. What do you think was the single moment where this escape could have been stopped? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We drop a new escape story every single week, and trust me, they only get more insane from here. See you next time.